Welcome, you adventuresome mortals who are open to being explorers and discoverers. You are willing to take a journey to explore the truths of religions and faiths on our planet. In the process, you may even expand your own personal spiritual path from what you hear from the big question speakers. Thank you, Will McGarvey, Executive Director of the Contra Costa Interfaith Council, for hosting our call. Gratitude to Susan Cole, President of the Interfaith Council, and to the Big Questions Committee, Ruth Ahern, Channing Miller, Gloria Sunshine, and to Rossmore Channel 28 for recording this Zoom. Our big question for the rest of this year is, what is the relationship between science and religion in today's world? So here we are, all of us, most of our planet, adjusting to changed personal lives and a changing world. And we're not sure what this means, which may leave us feeling somewhat insecure. However, we can focus on the positive. One thing that I've noticed is people's eyes when we're out in public, since that's all we can see. Khalil Gibran said, "The eyes are the windows of the soul." Our big question is quite relevant in today's changed world. Now more than ever, perhaps, we are looking toward the integration of science and religion in order to progress personally and planetarily through this current situation. The science is obvious. We're exposed to it every day in the news. However, the religious, spiritual aspects are not in the daily news. The virus has increased the fear, grief, anger, hunger, anxiety of many around the world. Now, and how can religion and spirituality help us deal with these debilitating emotions? Before introducing our speaker today, Chris Palmer, representing the Baha'i faith, I'd like to share with you some research which deals with the relationship between science and religion. Religion is often cast in opposition to science. Yet, according to recent developments in neuroscience, both are deeply rooted in the workings of the inner mind. Dr. Andrew Newberg, a world expert in neuroimaging studies of spiritual experiences, has authored at least 2 books, many more than that actually. But one is How God Changes Your Brain, and the other is How Enlightenment Changes Your Brain. So Dr. Newberg proposes a non-dogmatic approach to the scientific study of spirituality. For 30 years, he has been exploring and writing about the latest findings in a specific field in the field of neurosciences, neurotheology. Isn't that an interesting combination? Which studies the interface between the brain, neuro, and theology, religion. The goal of neurotheology is to determine what's happening in the brain during a religious experience. He asks provocative questions such as, is the human brain hardwired for God? Dr. Newberg scanned the brains of praying nuns, chanting Sikhs, and meditating Buddhists, and even people under the influence of psychoactive substances. It was discovered that several areas of the brain lit up, specifically the amygdala and the hypothalamus, meaning there was more activity in those areas. Meditation and chanting evoked feelings of awe, peace, and a divine connection. Dr. Newberg and others have found that people who engage in meditation and prayer felt an increased security in this uncertain world. And I'm sure that some of you who practice these meditation and prayer have experienced this also. So now we would welcome Chris Palmer, representing the Baha'i faith and its views on our big question, the relationship of science and religion in today's world. Mr. Palmer writes on technical subjects. He is also an accomplished amateur violinist and has been a student of the Baha'i faith for 45 years. You are here to play your violin, is that right, Chris? About his proposed talk, Chris commented, "This subject represents a unique challenge, as science and religion are inextricably tied together in the experience of Baha'i life. In order to reveal a glimpse of their connection, we will first need to peel them apart. One of the most intriguing preparations I have ever done in advance of a talk." Welcome, Chris Palmer. We got Chris up. Oh, there we go.
Okay. Thank you, Sarah.
You're welcome.
I'm delighted to be here today to present what I'll call a Baha'i-inspired reflection on the subject of the relationship between science and religion in today's world. I'd like to begin by informing you of my credentials to speak on this subject, because that explanation will tell you something important about the Baha'i faith. By way of metaphor, a couple of decades ago, the Association for Baha'i Studies of North America released an advertisement for new members with 5 pictures across the top of the advertisement. A doctor, a teacher, a mother with a baby, a business person, and a farmer with a pig. And the headline read, "Who is not the Baha'i scholar?" Turns out it was the pig. The point being that we share our thoughts and perspectives with one another quite openly, but no individual Baha'i is empowered to interpret the holy writings authoritatively for anyone else. So we're all obliged to study the faith deeply for ourselves. This has 3 benefits. The first is that no Baha'i ranks higher than any other. The second is that interpretation of the holy writings can never become a source of disunity or schism. And the third is that so that from a place of deep knowledge, Baha'is are empowered to consult intelligently about their local reality, about raising the capacity of our communities, and in turn about nurturing an ever-advancing civilization. So each of us is obliged to become a Baha'i scholar, by which definition then I am one, and that is my qualification to speak on this subject. I mention this by way of saying that this talk encapsulates my own personal understanding of the subject from almost half a century of study and reflection on the Baha'i writings. And I've interspersed it with quotes from the holy writings to ground it in some semblance of credibility. But it is only my personal reflection. I'd also like to offer up a bit of perspective at the outset on a Baha'i understanding of where religion comes from and how religion interacts with the development of humanity. 2017 was the bicentenary of the birth of Baha'u'llah, the divine messenger who founded the Baha'i faith, and the Universal House of Justice, our supreme administrative body, penned this paragraph in the introduction of their letter of tribute. And now I'm going to try something I haven't done before. I'm going to put something up on the screen for you. Hold on. It worked. The Baha'is maintain this salutary truth, that the peoples of the earth have always been remembered by their God. In every era of history, that unknowable reality has opened the gates of grace to the world by sending an emissary charged with providing the moral and spiritual stimulus that human beings need to cooperate and advance. Many of the names of these great lights to humankind are lost, but some shine out from the annals of the past as having revolutionized thought, unlocked stores of knowledge, and inspired the rise of civilizations, and their names continue to be honored and praised. Each of these spiritual and social visionaries, stainless mirrors of virtue, set out teachings and truths that answered the urgent needs of the age. As the world now faces its most pressing challenges yet, we acclaim Baha'u'llah, born 200 years ago, as such a figure. Like those divine messengers that preceded him and those who will follow him in the future, Baha'u'llah set out teachings and truths that answered the urgent needs of the age. In fact, he revealed specific principles for the advancement of humanity through the very nasty adolescence in which we currently find ourselves and in which we've been immersed since about the middle of the 19th century, in preparation for collective attainment of an unspeakably glorious future golden age. One of those principles is that religion and science must be recognized as two facets of the same truth. Baha'u'llah said, religion without science soon degenerates into superstition and fanaticism, and science without religion becomes merely the instrument of crude materialism. One of my favorite interfaith stories comes from the delightful website futilitycloset.com, and it tells the story of the philosopher Bertrand Russell, who was sentenced to 6 months in prison in 1918 for writing an anti-war essay. He said, "I was much cheered on my arrival at the prison by the warder at the gate who had to take particulars about me. He asked my religion, and I replied, agnostic. He asked how to spell it, and then he remarked with a sigh, well, there are many religions. I haven't heard of that one, but I suppose they all worship the same God." This remark kept me cheerful for about a week. The jailer's unwitting humor is hilarious, but I wonder whether he might be onto something. By way of context, from the letter quoted earlier, consider that the spiritual teachings brought by successive messengers through the ages found expression in their original teachings, which are the source of the universal values through which diverse peoples have found common cause and which have molded humanity's moral consciousness. True religion can be known by its fruits, its capacity to inspire, to transform, to unite, to foster peace and prosperity. It is in harmony with rational thought, and it is essential to social progress. So one may wonder, to the extent that one seeks sincerely after truth and fails to find such true religion, with its capacity to inspire, to transform, to unite, to foster peace and prosperity, and which is in harmony with rational thought and which is essential to social progress, and one has therefore declined to embrace anything less, then what purer expression of seeking by that soul than to remain on the sidelines? Now, I've never encountered an agnostic who is not a believer in science. So to the extent that science offers a path to spirituality, one could argue that one who has rejected religion as a path can still connect with their spiritual essence through the observation of nature and through refinement of their knowledge of science, through their recognition metaphorically of the spiritual verities enshrined in the experience of the material world. Let's take a moment for an exercise. Visualize yourself wrapped in a space, a closed system, that contains your entire identity and sustains your existence, for example, with oxygen and nutrients. Now, at a certain moment, that structure collapses and ceases to sustain you, and you become aware of a tunnel through which you are drawn towards a bright light. Unexpectedly, you emerge into a new reality surrounding that closed system of which you had been entirely unaware. So were you just born, or did you just die? Specifically, are you a baby graduating from the womb into an inconceivably vast and complex world of smells and tastes and sights and sounds and feels? Or a soul just emerging from a human body into a spiritual reality so breathtaking that no one in the world you left behind could conceive of it? With that as context, consider the Baha'i teaching that we are all eternal spiritual beings who, for reasons known only to what we call that unknowable essence, begin our existence in a physical classroom where everything, according to the Baha'i writings, is here for your education, and where every attribute in the physical world is a metaphor for some attribute of the spiritual worlds that surround us, and which are, according to the Baha'i writings, closer than your life vein. Whereas in the womb, according to the Baha'i teachings, we acquire the eyes and ears and limbs and so on, without which we would be handicapped in this material classroom. In the classroom itself, we come into contact with challenges and tests that develop those spiritual attributes that we require for our eternal spiritual life. The difference between the womb and the material world is that whereas in the womb we don't get to choose whether to grow fingers and toes, the choices we make in the physical classroom are ours, and we can choose, metaphorically speaking, to begin our eternal spiritual existence without fingers and toes. Some years ago, I happened to be in Port Elizabeth, South Africa, at the time of a meeting of the Association for Studies of Africa. The Association for Baha'i Studies of Africa. Whereas the North American version of such conferences mostly involve people with lots of letters after their names presenting academic papers on subjects like the application of the Baha'i teachings to the development of capacity of communities. This African version was much more informal, with each person standing up for 15 minutes to describe what they'd been thinking about during the past year. There was a poet reflecting on her theory that our purpose in this world is to prepare to be ancestors. There was a village chief speaking on issues of governance. And more relevant to this talk, there was a professor from the medical school at the University of Cape Town, where they had done the first heart transplants in the 1960s, who spoke about this metaphorical relationship between the material and spiritual worlds. He said he had come upon this principle in the Baha'i writings, and he found that he could actually use it as a tool, both in his professional work and in his private spiritual study. He said that when he would come up against a roadblock in his research, he would reflect on what might be the spiritual metaphor for that aspect of material reality. Having discovered the relationship, he would learn what he could about that aspect of the spiritual metaphor. And very often, the leap to the solution of his material problem would become an obvious one. Likewise, he said, then when he would come to a place of confusion in his spiritual study, he would reflect on what might be the material world metaphor for that aspect of spiritual reality, and having discovered that relationship, very often the leap to an understanding of the spiritual world, the spiritual, would become obvious. He gave the example of angular momentum, which describes how one object orbits another. The moon, for example, does not move in a circle around the Earth. It moves in a straight line, and were it not continuously attracted to the Earth by gravity, it would continue into space and be lost. He said this describes quite well the relationship between the insistent ego and the love of God. One could imagine the ego as the moon, and the gravity of Earth as the love of God. The greater the ego impulse, the more powerful the forces of attempted escape, and the further the distance at which we orbit, so to speak, our spiritual source. I should emphasize at this point that the Baha'is do not believe that we have any directly access to spiritual reality, that we can't even begin to understand it. But we can have enough of a grasp of the divine order through divine law as revealed by the messengers of God, and of natural law through our observations of nature and our knowledge of science, to understand spiritual reality metaphorically by reference to things in the material world we can know. I mentioned earlier a snippet from the Baha'i writings about the spiritual worlds being closer than your life vein. Here's the full quote from Baha'u'llah. This most great, this fathomless and surging ocean is near, astonishingly near unto you. Behold, it is closer to you than your life vein. Swift as the twinkling of an eye ye can, if ye but wish it, reach and partake of this imperishable favor, this God-given grace, this incorruptible gift, this most potent and unspeakably glorious bounty. I heard a talk some years ago by the late Dr. Peter Kahn, who was a professor of engineering at the University of Michigan before he was elected to the Universal House of Justice. He said that his understanding of the Baha'i writings is that we live in two worlds simultaneously, a material world and a spiritual world, and that our actions have consequences in both worlds. He spoke of the metaphorical relationship between the two worlds, and he observed that the central metaphor for the relationship of the material and spiritual realities is that of magnetism or attraction. In the physical classroom, we understand that there are forces of attraction, including magnetism, gravity, and the nuclear forces, which hold together minerals so we can have pebbles and stones and boulders, and which allow vegetables to draw forth water and minerals from the earth and to process them through photosynthesis, and which endow animals, including humans, with the neural connections that enable movement and perception and consciousness. Even physicists don't know what magnetism or gravity or the nuclear forces are, but they can describe them, and they can predict aspects of their behavior through well-known calculations. At the level of the human being, we experience these forces through their manifestation in the material world as magnetism and so on, and also through the corresponding spiritual force of attraction, which we call love, including the love between human beings and the love between human beings and the divine. Although we're not able to grasp the nature of spiritual worlds, we can extend the metaphor of attraction, whether manifested as a magnetic force or as love, across the axis of science and religion to understand the process of our spiritual development. Just as we can't define what magnetism is, but we can speak with confidence about how it behaves, likewise, we can observe how certain actions in the physical classroom resonate into the spiritual dimension to enable us here in this material dimension to develop spiritually. We have specific guidance from the Baha'i writings telling us that the worlds of God are in perfect harmony and correspondence with one another. Each world in this limitless universe is a mirror reflecting the history and nature of all the rest. The physical universe is in perfect correspondence with the spiritual or divine realm. The world of matter is an outer expression or facsimile of the inner kingdom of spirit. The spiritual world is like unto the phenomenal world. They are the exact counterpoint of each other. Whatever objects appear in this world of existence are the outer pictures of the world within. It is obvious that all created things are connected one to the other by a linkage complete and perfect, even, for example, as are the members of the human family. When existing elements are gathered together according to the natural order and with perfect strength, they become a magnet for the spirit, and the spirit will become manifest in them with all its perfections. Let me repeat that last one. When existing elements are gathered together according to the natural order and with perfect strength, they become a magnet for the spirit, and the spirit will become manifest in them with all its perfections. Thus we pray. A materialist might observe that this is no more than an individual in his chamber, reciting words into the air, and there is nothing more. Yet we understand from the writings that a prayer uttered with devotion is, in fact, a magnet for spiritual power. Not just maybe, but unequivocally so. And the next time we pray from a place of standing on the shoulders of our previous self, with greater spiritual power. There are other paths to spiritual growth, for example, selfless service to humankind. Such acts, performed with devotion, act as a magnet for spiritual power. And so we pray or we serve with devotion and we attract spiritual power. And then we pray or serve from that place of greater spiritual power, and we attract even greater spiritual power, seemingly endlessly. But there is a catch. This doesn't just occur in isolation on an infinite upward curve of spiritual growth. In fact, we do grow spiritually, but then we encounter tests that refine our character and steel us to attract ever higher levels of spiritual power. We go out into the world with our newfound spiritual power, and we're tested. And we pass the test or we don't. And if we don't, the tests come to us again and again in some form or another until we do. And then we're ready to receive greater spiritual power and to be tested and refined further. What does it mean that we pray with pure motives? The following quote from Baha'u'llah places this in perspective. They who are the beloved of God, in whatever place they gather and whomsoever they may meet, must evince in their attitude towards God and in the manner of the celebration of his praise and glory such humility and submissiveness that every atom of the dust beneath their feet may attest the depth of their devotion. The conversation carried by these holy souls should be informed with such power that these same atoms of dust will be thrilled by its influence. They should conduct themselves in such manner that the earth upon which they tread may never be allowed to address them such words as these: I am to be preferred above you. For witness how patient I am in bearing the burden which the husbandman layeth upon me. I am the instrument that continually imparteth unto all beings the blessings with which he who is the source of all grace hath entrusted me, notwithstanding the honor conferred upon me and the unnumbered evidences of my wealth, a wealth that supplieth the needs of all creation. Behold the measure of my humility. Witness with what absolute submissiveness I allow myself to be trodden beneath the feet of men. This process extends beyond the magnetic principle, which operates through physics in the physical classroom, and through attraction of spiritual power across dimensions through prayer and other devotional acts performed with devotion. It enables us to develop spiritually and to prepare ourselves through our interaction with the world for our eternal spiritual life and to arrive there, metaphorically speaking, with the fingers and toes we will need in that realm fully developed, corresponding to the eyes and ears we needed in this physical classroom, which we developed in the womb. The next section of this talk addresses some of the subtopics that were suggested by the committee as grist for thought. There's not enough time to answer all of them, and because the teachings of the Baha'i faith are so tightly, inseparably integrated with science, some of the questions have already been answered, but I'd like to explore several of them. Has your faith, spiritual, philosophical path been influenced by science? This question seems directed at me personally, and I feel that my personal experience is perhaps not so important, but I will humor the committee with an answer. My education includes some science, which enables me to formulate hard questions, and philosophy, which enables me to make distinctions. Initially, this hindered me until I learned that one's capacity for analysis and distinctions requires a complementary spiritual component. This happened in 1983 when I was taking a break from a rather intensive fellowship year in Austria. And I took 2 weeks off in Eigenschlegel, a remote village in the north near what at that time was the Czech border. At that point, I had been struggling with the notion of faith for years. And I was walking in the woods one afternoon when it occurred to me that the problem wasn't faith, but the left brain, where I happened to live at that time. It had no capacity to choose faith, or frankly, to choose anything. As I came to understand, the capacity of what we call the left brain is formidable, but it's circumscribed by the limits of its function. It can gather data, it can make distinctions, and it can process all of that according to known processes. But this doesn't add up to an ability to make a choice. When all of that data, all of those distinctions, and the results of all of that processing were viewed together as a whole, my left brain didn't know what to do with it. Yet, it resonated with that part of me that recognizes beauty and truth at a level beyond language and beyond the capacities of the left brain. I realized in that moment that I actually have an innate capacity to recognize what is true and right and beautiful, and that it lies beyond language and outside the box defined by my left brain. I've come to understand since that time that many of the greatest scientific discoveries have occurred as the result of such leaps, resulting from recognition of the beauty and a certain arrangement of what the left brain has very kindly laid out and organized. By way of example, I would not require any special education to recognize a Mozart symphony as beautiful, or the Golden Rule as true, or the Universal Declaration of Human Rights as right. The recognition is innate, and as I have come to understand, flows from a relationship of the soul with the divine, like an antenna or like a tuning fork resonating sympathetically, with that resonance being the trigger for recognition. That's not so much a Baha'i analysis, but my own experience of how science and philosophy interacted with the spiritual within me to enable me to recognize beauty and truth in the teachings of Baha'u'llah and to embrace the Baha'i faith. Are religion and science mutually exclusive realms? If not, how are they integrated? As we've already described, the more one knows of nature and of science, the more we can understand about the spiritual dimensions. In the Baha'i writings, both science and religion are about the conquest of ignorance. God sends his messengers to liberate the children of men from the darkness of ignorance. If we say religion is opposed to science, we lack knowledge of either true science or true religion, for both are founded upon the premises and conclusions of reason, and both must bear its tests. Unfortunately, we don't have the time to dive deeper on this subject, into the specific ways in which religion and science are both supplementary and complementary, each enhancing the practice of the other and both inherently intertwined whenever either is practiced well. That's a subject for an entirely different talk. Has your personal spiritual experience evolved or remained the same as science has expanded and progressed? I'm a child of the 1950s. Since that time, one can cite the rise of a new class of technologists without conscience who have shamelessly created the conditions for the extinction of humankind. I needn't call them out, you all know of whom I speak. Yet there are also instances during this time of scientific developments motivated by the highest spiritual values. For example, Dr. Jonas Salk, who developed the polio vaccine but refused to patent it and profit from it. We celebrate the team of engineers at NASA with the whole world praying for their success, safely returned Apollo 13. We could cite many other fine examples of what can happen when science, with pure motives, refuses to yield to the pressures of crude materialism. On the religious front, I've witnessed the rise of certain religions that have become fused with the most lamentable aspects of culture and weighted down with the dogma of corruption and greed, supporting hatred and extremism and making a mockery of the original teachings of their divine messengers, teachings which were the source of universal values, through which diverse peoples had found common cause, and which had molded humanity's moral consciousness. On the flip side of that, I'd like to call out, or take a moment to call out my friend Reverend Will, our host today, and to make what some of you may consider a rather astonishing claim, that I consider this Presbyterian minister as much a part of my religious community as my fellow Baha'is. I say this because when it comes to the kind of world unity that a Baha'i would say lies at the confluence of science and religion, Reverend Will walks that walk and manifests that reality. He leads a remarkable organization of 108 faith communities in Contra Costa County. I love his use of the phrase in referring to them as congregations that, quote, pray well together. Although he is the current head, this remarkable interfaith council has existed for years. I recall an interfaith Thanksgiving service under the auspices of the council about 20 years ago in Danville. I could not name a religion that was not on the program. And the evening concluded with the local rabbi and the local mullah standing side by side on a Lutheran altar, teaching the packed hall a song with the two words, Shalom and Salam. Once the congregation got the hang of the song, the rabbi and the mullah began to dance together. This is what it looks like when religion pushes back, with a mindset that embraces science and learning against superstition and prejudice. What are some of the problems your faith path has had to grapple with concerning science? Sometimes issues of modernity come up that are not mentioned in the original writings of the divine messengers. Although the Baha'i faith traversed its early years on a parallel historical path with modern science and technology, such issues still arise. On such matters, the Universal House of Justice is empowered to legislate. Usually it declines, deferring on matters of science to the process of scientific discovery. Sometimes, though, it provides guidance to the Baha'i community on how to advance scientific discourse for the benefit of humanity. To provide a glimpse into what this looks like, I'd like to share with you just 2 paragraphs from a fairly lengthy letter they penned in 2017 in response to some Baha'is inquiring how we should, as individuals and as a community, respond to the issue of global warming. On the matter of climate change and other vital issues with profound implications for the common good, Baha'is have to avoid being drawn into the all too common tendencies evident in contemporary discourse to delineate sharp dichotomies, to become ensnared in contests for power, and engage in intractable debate that obstructs the search for viable solutions to the world's problems. Humanity would be best and most effectively served by setting aside partisan disputation, pursuing united action that is informed by the best available scientific evidence and grounded in spiritual principles, and thoughtfully revising action in light of experience. The incessant focus on generating and magnifying points of difference, rather than building upon points of agreement, leads to exaggeration that fuels anger and confusion, thereby diminishing the will and capacity to act on matters of vital importance. In those parts of the world where discussions surrounding anthropogenic climate change have indeed fallen prey to an almost intractable divide, Baha'is must be sensitive to the danger of this divisive partisan approach taking root in the community. This may well mean that some individuals or agencies have to consider to what extent their views about action required on climate change reflect a posture that is too extreme, whether it's in exaggerating the problem or minimizing it. Concepts and principles associated with Baha'i consultation inform how the friends should interact among themselves and how they should participate in social discourses and social action. Consultation provides a means by which common understanding can be reached and a collective course of action defined. It involves a free, respectful, dignified, and fair-minded effort on the part of a group of people to exchange views, seek truth, and attempt to reach consensus. An initial difference of opinion is the starting point for examining an issue in order to reach greater understanding and consensus. It should not become a cause of rancor, aversion, or estrangement. By acting in unity, a conclusion about a particular course of action may be tested and revised as necessary through a process of learning. Otherwise, stubbornness and persistence in one's views will ultimately lead to discord and wrangling, and the truth will remain hidden. This excerpt refers to consultation, a practice that lies at the heart of the Baha'i experience of administration. And I bring it up here because its requisite posture of learning and its systematic approach to fact-finding and the application of principle result in a process of discovery that is scientific at heart. You may wonder what that looks like. By way of background, years ago I happened upon a book called The Act of Creation by Arthur Koestler. In that book, he assigned the label frames of reference to the random thoughts that float about in our heads. He said that they come together in three different ways. If they're mutually exclusive, yet they appear together in the same universe, we have the punchline of a joke. If there's something intriguing about the relationship, but we can't quite put our finger on it, that's the aesthetic experience. And more relevant to this talk, when they fit together like the pieces of a puzzle, that's the moment of insight or epiphany. It seems to me, and this is just my personal experience, that Baha'i consultation is the process that Mr. Koestler described, but not in one head, but collectively, simultaneously in 9. Baha'i consultation occurs in the spiritual assembly that administers a local or national Baha'i community. It begins by setting aside self-interest and partisanship and adopting a posture of learning. In regards to the matter at hand, all participants place their best thinking on the table, where the ownership of ideas and insights passes to the group. Whereas at the outset, each participant's mind defined the limits of their understanding, now they possess the most relevant knowledge and perception of all. Given sufficient humility, these new frames of reference float about in everybody's minds, juxtaposing, colliding, and combining to yield new insights. When the fruits of this cross-pollination of ideas appear on the table, the process repeats. Many experience an exhilarating upward spiral of understanding, as this process of sharing and internalization, this virtual mind meld, consistently yields results both profound and unexpected, vastly exceeding the capacity of any individual member of the group. Finally, one participant articulates the answer. Often by that point, the answer has become obvious to all. This process transforms the participants in the sense that successive consultations stand on the shoulders of those that precede them. This increasingly panoramic vantage informs the perpetual learning process through which Baha'i institutions refine their trajectory to read their local reality and to align themselves with the inexorable historical forces advancing civilizations. Can science make faith more real? Yes, but I would make the distinction that it's not so much a matter of this or that aspect of science making faith incrementally more real. It's actually foundational and integral. As we've indicated previously, true religion can be known by its fruits, its capacity to inspire, to transform, to unite, to foster peace and prosperity. It is in harmony with rational thought, and it is essential to social progress. Allow me to repeat that line, that last line. It is in harmony with rational thought. It's an integral part of the religious experience. So now we consider how the intersection of religion and science can provide a way forward for humanity. I'd like to conclude on this subject by reading a single paragraph from a document prepared by the Baha'i International Community for a United Nations conference in Denmark in 1995. In light of the scientific process of discovery to be found in consultation, this one paragraph seems to encapsulate it all. History has thus far recorded principally the experience of tribes, cultures, classes, and nations. With the physical unification of the planet in this century and acknowledgement of the interdependence of all who live on it, the history of humanity as one people is now beginning. The long, slow civilizing of human character has been a sporadic development, uneven and admittedly inequitable in the material advantages it has conferred. Nevertheless, endowed with the wealth of all the genetic and cultural diversity that has evolved through past ages, the Earth's inhabitants are now challenged to draw on their collective inheritance, to take up consciously and systematically the responsibility for the design of their future.
Thank you so much, Chris. That was very rich. I feel it in my rational mind, and I feel it in my soul body. I really appreciate very much how you put this together, and the beautiful quotes that you have pulled from the Baha'i teachings. It's just very rich. So now we have a time for questions. I know there are several questions in the chat box, but before we do that, do any of the participants have a question they'd like to ask Chris? I think if you raise your hand, Will can unmute you. Is that right, Will? Will's muted.
Well, that's one way we can do it, but with this many people, we have 32 people, it might be, we can try it in a large group, or we can try it in small groups. Which would you rather?
Well, I'm kind of interested to begin with to try it in a large group if there's going to be just one person asking a question. I think if we get to the point where people want to discuss something, then we probably should go into the breakup groups.
Okay, Chris, why don't you start with the questions that Sarah has put in the chat room. How would a person deepen their personal relationship with God? And then can you say more about the afterlife, and does this involve science?
I feel that we covered quite a bit of that in the talk. I could recap some of it. Could you read the first question again? I don't want to get the exact wording.
Yeah, how would a person deepen their personal relationship with God?
Okay. Our understanding from the Baha'i writings is that here in the physical classroom, we have the ability to access spiritual forces through prayer, for example, through other services offered in a devotional in a devotional attitude. There's a principle in the Baha'i writings that our primary form of worship is through our work, through the devotional character and the humility with which we serve. And so what we know is that when we pray or serve, that this attracts the spiritual powers, and that it causes within us spiritual growth. And having experienced this, we go out into the world and we're tested. And our spiritual nature is tested and refined. And should we pass those tests, then we are ready to pray again and serve again, and to do so from a place of higher spiritual power. Sometimes we don't pass those tests, and they come back to us in other forms until we pass them. So I guess you could say that it's a three-step process. We pray, spiritual powers come to us, we go out into the world and they're tested, and we achieve a higher level of spiritual power, and we pray again, and we go out into the world again, and it's circular in the sense that we continue to grow spiritually over time. Could I ask what the second part of the question was again?
It was more about afterlife. Is there anything about the afterlife that involves science?
The understanding that we have of the spiritual worlds comes from their metaphorical manifestation in the material world or material classroom. And so what little we know about the spiritual worlds, we can only know by reference to things that we know in this world. From a Baha'i point of view, we are spiritual beings who happen to start out our existence here in a material world, but we are in essence spiritual beings. And when we pass to the next world, maybe I should use a different word than that. When we pass on to the spiritual world, we take with us the spiritual capacities, the spiritual powers that we've developed in this world, and we continue over eternally to grow closer to God. The process of spiritual growth doesn't end in this world. And so we know that the next world is a paradise, but the details of that are not clear to us. We just know that we can prepare in this world to be better able to function in the next world to the extent that we develop our spiritual capacities here.
In other conversations that you and I have had, one of the things that I remember about the Baha'i faith is that there's no intrinsic difference between the truth that one finds religiously and what truth we can find scientifically. Can you say a little bit more about that?
Sure. Well, truth is truth. And we regard truth as having both a religious dimension and a scientific dimension. Essentially, they agree, and sometimes you have to give it a great deal of thought to find out how they agree. We could talk about a specific instance of something, I suppose, but the general principle is that, let me go back to the one of the slides. If we say that religion is opposed to science, we lack the knowledge of either true science or true religion, for both are founded upon the premises and conclusions of reason, and both must bear its test. I'm trying to think of an example And it's hard to do that on just the spur of the moment. I'm sure that if I had an hour, I could come up with something. It's if you wanted to give me a specific example, I could try to relate that to some principle in the Baha'i writings, but I'm not able to do so on the spur of the moment.
Well, for Christians, one of the biggest issues, especially in American history, came up with the Scopes trial. And it divided Christianity between those that became okay with the theory of evolution as a way of understanding human origins, and a different group took a very different position, thinking that they had to, in order to maintain their idea of God's all-powerfulness, created a different form of Christianity in order to try to protect themselves from modernity. Was there ever a crisis around modernity or scientific knowledge in that way?
Well,
in Baha'is?
that's actually a really good example. So you have the teachings of Baha'u'llah, which are that evolution is correct, and that the human soul was always destined to manifest itself in a human form. So you have, on the one hand, the deference to science in regards to the processes of evolution, and you also have a teaching regarding how the soul fits into all of this. As Baha'is, we defer to the writings of Baha'u'llah. Those are regarded as infallible. Nobody questions them. Nobody has the authority to question them. There are matters that Baha'u'llah has never commented on. And in those matters, the Universal House of Justice has the authority to legislate. Typically, they will defer on such a matter as this to the progress of science. And so there's no room really for a crisis to appear, because there's a recognition of among the Baha'is of Baha'u'llah as a source, and we haven't really encountered any aspect of science that has come into conflict with that. Although we do need to understand things, with I would say with a greater clarity, in order to combine these two understandings sometimes. I
That
have
gives some
found
good.
that.
Oh, go ahead. Keep going.
Oh, please go ahead.
It might that great answer, thanks, and it might give some good context for a question from Channing Miller. What advice do you have to bridge the current divide between the materialism of science and the understanding that a spiritual aspect of reality is ever expanding consciousness? This seems to be the dilemma between science and religion.
I can only speak personally about that to say that it seems to me that the difficulty with science is that without a spiritual mindset, that science can go in the wrong directions, and we can end up with as we have a number of technologists and in some cases capitalists who have taken us down a path that endangers humanity. And the education of scientists in ethics is one side of this. The internalization of the spiritual, though, is very important. If you're faced with the opportunity to make billions of dollars, one's semester in ethics class may or may not guide one to do the right thing. But an internalized spiritual point of view causes one to approach the entire scientific process from a different place of interest in discovery, interest in knowing more about the universe. And from a Baha'i point of view, now graduating from just Chris's thought, this would best be achieved by a spiritualization of humanity. And probably too much of a digression to talk about the ways in which the Baha'i community is working to raise the capacity of communities, both materially and spiritually, and to keep those two elements of our existence at the forefront together.
Ruth asks if this dilemma is the critical issue for this time.
Hey, do you want me to comment on that? The passage that we read from the letter from the Universal House of Justice on how to deal with issues of climate change come down to learning to talk with each other, sitting across from each other and being willing to learn from each other, being willing to set aside our personal interests, and participating in a process of discovery together to take the existing science, to apply it to the situation through consultation. And then there's an additional piece of this, and that is that once you've taken a step, that step is not necessarily going to be proved to be the best thing you could have done. You're going to learn through taking that first step. And there's a process of reflection then that requires us to set aside our partisanship and to cast blame and to examine together how might we do this better at the next iteration. So it's a process of starting from the facts, from science, applying the principles, which primarily come from religion, and coming to a conclusion about how best to proceed. And then having proceeded, having engaged in action, to reflect on how we might improve on that action on the next iteration. It's a very specific process.
But it sounds like, to me, it's also a part of the relationship that you have as a core principle as Baha'is that that teaches the unity of all humanity, and that we're members of one tribe rather than multiple tribes. And so it resists that tribalism that says it's okay if I do this for me and my own, while other people may be harmed by that action.
Very well put. There was a letter from the House of Justice about a year ago on prosperity and the notion of prosperity for everyone. What does that look like? And the core principle was that if we start from the principle that we are all, humanity is one, then we can't really go wrong.
Ruth has a question for you. Ruth?
Yes.
Actually, my question is for the participants. If you can raise your hand and wave at will, I believe he will be able to see you, and then you can ask your question on the speaker for everybody to hear. And does that work, Will?
There's a little button. Oh, I guess it's not here. Sometimes you can raise your hand in the participants list. It's not giving that to me. It's not giving me that
No, I
option
didn't
here.
see that either.
Yeah. You can also do this reaction under the reactions button, like a thumbs up or a clap. If you, it'll only be there for a minute, but I'm keeping an eye mostly on the speaker and not the general view. So it's still easier if you text into the chat room if you have a question, or if you'd like to share a question. There you go. Ruth has her hand raised, and so does Peter Nelson. So did you want to ask a question, Ruth?
No, I was just trying it out to see if it worked. It's on the more button on mine.
Oh, it's on the more button.
Right.
Okay. Peter, did you have a question?
I didn't have a question, but Chris and I have been friends for a long time, and I had a background in science. That was one of my primary interests when I learned about Baha'i faith. And just to have a complementary point of view that Chris gave on the last question on advancement of civilization, it's really dependent upon both material and spiritual progress. Think of science and religion as two wings of one bird. The bird is not going to fly unless it has a balance between the two. That too much advancement of science without a balance of religion leads to materialism, weapon development, degrading the environment, all sorts of things we know. And that's corollary, too much religion without a balance of science leads to superstition, belief in irrational things, have challenges with trying to take literal explanations for things. The four corners of the earth led to the idea that the earth was flat because a four corner would be a table, things like that. So a rational, God gave us a mind. And that doesn't mean a test as like eating the apple in the Garden of Eden. It's to better understand him, to grow civilization.
Good points, Peter. Ruth, did you have something else?
Not specifically at the moment, but there's so many things we could explore. If anybody has questions, and write it down. Or we can break it. Maybe this is the time to break up into groups for 10 or 15 minutes and then discuss with one another.
I think that's a good idea at this point. We've got about 15 minutes left until 3:30 when this is over. So maybe Will, can you break us up into smaller groups, and we can go from there?
Yes, I can. I'm going to break us into groups, into 5 different rooms, and that'll put 5 to 6 people into each room. So then you can explore and chase all the rabbit trails yourself. And you'll get a notice about 60 seconds before we come back for our closing. So we'll be doing this for, let's say, 12 minutes, and we'll come back for our last 30 minutes. How does that sound?
Sounds good.
Okay. Okay, Mary Lee, are you still there? Bridget, did you want to stay in this room or go to one of the other groups? I can't hear you.
Okay, I'd like
There
to
we
go
go.
to another one.
Into which one?
The next one after the first one.
We're only doing one breakout.
Only one. Okay, go ahead and please put me there.
You might have to hit
Join.
you might have to hit that join button into breakout room 1. There you go. Mary Lee, did you want to go into a breakout room or did you want to just stay here?
So that seems to me like the question. Will, we were just talking about how we manage consultation in a world which is so fraught. And I was just thinking that over and thinking that the Baha'i perspective, I believe, is that we're not going to solve the problems through force and through imposing our ideas on other people, that this has to be a gradual process, and that it probably is going to take more time than we would like. But the only way to proceed and make the outcome really meet the needs of all people is to go through the consultation process, share ideas, and grow together as a humanity. I don't know if I said that very well, but I don't think there's an alternative, because beating each other up is not really going to solve anything except to diminish the population and keep the power struggle intact.
Yeah.
I mean, not an answer, except that we got a lot of work ahead of us, and we have to do it, one by one, step by step. That there's not going to be a lightning bolt from heaven that's going to do it all for us.
Well, if we accept evolution and that tribalism worked for us, 6 to 4 million years ago, to be able to gain consciousness, to be in small groups of people that were able to pass on learning from aged to younger and pass on cultural knowledge around those campfires, then we are who we are because of that age of tribalism. But maybe the point of our evolution now is to figure out how we move beyond that physical tribalism that did serve us at one point in our existence, but it's not serving us now that there are 7.7 billion humans on the planet.
Exactly. Yeah.
So we have to
And so
stop.
many of us, I was going to say, and so many of us are connected through the internet, through social media, that it's not a matter of a smaller tribe trying to figure out something or to develop. It is millions of people can be pushing a negative force one way, and there may be a lot of spiritual people with the spiritual force being out there as well. But it's
Or a selfish force.
a what?
Or a selfish force, or
A
an
selfish-
idea that serves them
Yeah.
while not serving others.
Yeah. And so that I find that difficulty in how to move through that with the urgency that's needed at this point, because there's an urgency as well. But Eckhart Tolle said something wonderful. He said that when Russia was like toppled, he said it didn't happen because everybody tried to make that happen. He said at some point what happens is, if there is this energy going into the spiritual realm, at some point it's like exponential then, such as, like, we could look at the virus as a metaphor. It just starts spreading so quickly, and that was very hopeful for me.
There's almost a
that
new energy force that comes into being that encourages others to live in that same energy. Kaleo and Elise know a lot about that energy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it seems that things like disease and war and famine and climate change are gradually going to change the awareness of more and more people, right? So that exponentially that is going to have an effect. And in the meantime, we are left to practice and expand our own spirituality and try to bring that to everything that we do so that we're having a positive effect. But it's still not going to happen until the world is really ready for it. And we're learning from the things that we've done to ourselves. What happens if we keep on doing this to ourselves? So that makes sense?
Yeah, I think there's a bit about life, and it's been easier for us as modern humans to view ourselves as separate from nature rather than radically interconnected with nature, and celebrating our createdness and our animalness.
Yeah.
And the more we've moved away from that cosmology of interconnectedness, the more the more easy it is for us to live as if we're individuals, and even calling ourselves rational actors as individuals seeking our best good for the world, and our best ability to experience the good in this world. But the more we understand how interconnected everything is, then what's good for me might be bad for another person in India or China or New Zealand or Africa. And if I start with a different cosmology and worldview that encourages me to recognize that my actions have profound implications for the lives of others around the world, then it's more difficult for me to give the philosophical or religious answer to myself that I'm doing the right thing if it's harming another person or animal elsewhere in the world. So part of it is our own worldview gets challenged more and more. And I think we've seen our own worldview being challenged by science. But the people who are most resistant to that message of the unity of all things and the interconnectedness of all things tend to be the same people that are profiting off of the killing of the planet.
And one of the teachings of Baha'u'llah is that this is a process and that there will be chaos and misfortune as part of the process. So while the old world is decaying around us, in the meantime, we're building up structures to hold up the world order in a new way, so that it's almost inevitable that the forces of moving forward and holding back and resisting are going to be in a great deal of conflict for a period of time until we move on to the next phase of relationships. Does that make sense?
Does the
Yes.
Baha'i system say anything about what will help us get to the place where we're able to do that?
Spiritual connections, which I interpret as meaning understanding that we're all one. Part of that understanding, anyway.
Kaleo, Elise, we haven't heard from you yet.
I just feel, growing up in Hawaii, we say that everything is lokahi, which means everything is connected. Especially on an island, when you live on an island surrounded by the ocean, you have to take care of the land, and you have to take care of each other. Otherwise, it's very hard to survive. You don't pollute your backyard because you need clean water and all of that, we say everything is lokahi, everything is connected through energy, through a spiritual energy. And we also say that that's one spiritual principle that is really true. Another truth is that everything is love. everything is this harmony, which is love. And that I believe the only thing we can do is to try to find the love for ourselves and really try to share it with others. We have to share from our hearts. And that to me is that's what Elise and I practice. I don't know what other people do. So it's not in books. It's through the heart. Yeah, and I think many people have forgotten that.
You sound like my Sufi friends.
Oh,
Yeah.
maybe they're from the islands.
But I think that's the essence of spiritual.
Yeah.
as well.
It's going to
Yeah.
take us back
Yeah.
here. All right, we're back. We're grateful for everyone being in their breakout rooms for just a few minutes. And do we have Sarah back yet?
I'm back, yes.
Okay. I don't think we fixed all the world's problems, but most of them. How did your group do?
Oh, we had a good sharing with Peter, who was a scientist who had a very, very rich spiritual experience, which just increased his understandings of science. And we had a sharing by Kathy, who grew up Christian and asked some good questions, and prayer is important to her. And then Chris came in and shared his experience. But I'd like to hear maybe from some of the other groups.
If one person from each group could give us a brief report, that would be nice. Just unmute yourself.
Okay.
So, oh, sorry, go ahead, Bridget.
Yeah. In my group, we had Colleen and Mary and myself. There was another person that we were hoping to hear from named Sheila Wilkins, but Sheila did not appear. So it was just the three of us ladies, and we had a lovely sharing. And I was pleased to be able to come to the conclusion that we are all one. We just have different names from what we grew up with, the faith that we started out with. It was very nice. And we hope to meet each other again.
Thanks, Bridget.
Mhm.
Channing, did you have something to share?
Sure. So our group was Sunshine and Ed Langthorne and Linda Carter and myself, and we had a wonderful conversation. Ed, being a Baha'i, added much more depth about the Baha'i understanding of science and religion. And, Sunshine added her perspective, and Linda really kind of brought out the whole area of quantum physics in the area of, are we all one? Because material science really just looks at people as a collection of objects rather than seeing the oneness of everything. And I left the group with the thought of a communion of subjects is very different from a collection of objects. And when you look at science and you look at materialism as a communion of subjects, you really see that we are all one.
You're sounding like Rabbi Martin Buber now. Phenomenology.
Right.
Yeah.
So we had a wonderful group. Everybody got to speak, and we exchanged ideas.
Others that would like to share?
Kaleo?
Yeah.
Unmute yourself, Kaleo.
I just wanted to say in our group with Ruth, Elise, and with Will and Sandra, that I think what we decided that what is really important is to live a life of prayer, and to live a life of prayer, and to learn to love oneself and to love others and to share. So Ruth, did you want to add to that?
And to live with interconnectivity and to recognize our interconnectedness. And I think quantum physics, Channing, I think you're right that that's enabled us to view ourselves as a part of an interconnected whole in easier ways than in Newtonian physics. But I think it's easier for us to reclaim some of the ancient traditions that have never lost that cosmology of the interconnectedness of all things.
Right.
So I see a
Another-
few people, so please go ahead and stick your hand up and talk. Right.
So Lise, so another thing I got out of our conversation together in our group was that trusting in the strength and the spiritual strength of interconnectedness, which is much stronger and healing in the long run than the spirit of tribalism and individual power that sometimes we feel like is dominating in this world. So not to give up hope, but to continue cultivating that spirit of connectedness. And as Kaleo was saying in Hawaii, the spirit of lokahi, or unity among us. So keep putting energy there. It's not for nothing.
True. Any other last sharings before we have a conclusion from Sarah? Or Chris, did you have any final thoughts for us? Chris Palmer?
He's muted, Will.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
I was just going to say that we're all one.
Very Baha'i. Then Sarah, go ahead and close us out and we'll end our time together.
Okay, well, I want to thank you once again, Will, for helping guide us through this. It's been a rich experience. We certainly have, I believe I have come away once again with the feeling of oneness and connectedness through our sharings, and the golden threads that I can see going through Baha'i. I see going through my my teachings, the Urantia teachings, and you know, the rest of you probably saw the golden threads too. So I think we keep weaving these golden threads, and interfaith certainly it goes a long ways towards this weaving the loom that we are all working on. So with that, I will say thank you. And thank you so much, Chris, for your thoughts. I really came away with a very deep and broad understanding of Baha'i, more so than I've ever had. You know, it sounds so universal. It sounds so parallel and so connecting with my particular path and teachings. And I just really appreciate your preparation and your deep spiritual understandings, which came across very clearly. Thank you. Thank you, Chris. And thank you, everybody. Thank you. See you next month. Right?
And Will will be our speaker next month.
That's right.
Yes.
We'll
Good.
be together the third Monday of June, and we'll have the same theme, and you'll just get to hear some of my thoughts on it. And we'll try to chase the rabbit trails there too. Thanks, everyone. Thanks again, Chris, for your presentation, and all of the folks joining us today. We really appreciate your presence. And if you want to share this, you can find it on the YouTube channel. Just look up Interfaith Council of Contra Costa County, and you'll be able to find the link to this and other great programs that we have there.